Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be covering a hot topic. I'm going to be answering a question from a subscriber. Is Sweden safe? Welcome back. My name is Shalika Marker. I am a Sri Lankan who's been living in Sweden for the last 15 years. And before that, I lived in England for 10 years. So I have a perspective on living in 3 different countries with different cultures. And on my channel, I like to talk about all of the cultural differences and the things that I find interesting to talk about Sweden. And I do compare it to Sri Lanka and I do compare it to England because that's where I've been living, and I have a sort of picture of what things are like in those countries as well. So I like to do a small comparison, and in no way, by no means does it mean that I don't like any of the other countries. If I do compare something negative there to something positive here and vice versa. I love all 3 countries just the same. England holds a really dear place in my heart, as well as Sri Lanka. So please leave me comments in the description box below. I am so thrilled that all of you are commenting and correcting me. All of that is fine. Just keep it clean, and I am so happy to answer any of your questions. So the subscriber wrote to me and he asked me, he or she, now I can't remember, asked me or told me that they were planning to move to Sweden, and that they had heard from a lot of people that Sweden is very unsafe and they were unable to make a decision on whether to move to Sweden or not. And I really want to cover that topic today. It is a hot topic, a topic that's been circulating the news and the internet for a while now, for the last 5 years, about Sweden being sort of a hub, or the crime rate in Sweden being the highest in Europe and especially in Scandinavian countries. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my perspective. First and foremost, I'm going to say it straight out here. I find Sweden 110% safe. I have absolutely no reservations or qualms about telling anybody or convincing anybody to move to Sweden, especially if you're thinking you're not moving to Sweden because of the crime rate. That just, I wouldn't even factor into my decision, and I'm going to explain why. In order to understand why I think Sweden is unsafe and why a Swede who's been living here all their life and unable to wrap their head around the fact that the crime rate and gang violence has increased so much here in Sweden, I want to explain where I'm coming from, because I do understand the Swedes and their perspective as well. Now, growing up in Sri Lanka in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, we had an ongoing civil war. There were a lot of people who fled the country and settled in places like England and Australia, and as well as the States and Canada, because we had a civil war going on for a long time. Now, my mom and I, we lived there with my grandparents as well for the entirety of the war. Living in a country where there is a civil war going on, it isn't easy. Now, I lived there and I remember suicide bombs would go off in Colombo sporadically. I remember the suicide bomb going off at the Central Bank. My mom's friend worked there. My husband's cousin, he lost, I think, some sight in his eyes. And I remember the huge bomb that went outside my grandmother's house. I remember my mom and her friends shoveling gravel. The roof caved in on my grandmother. She had a gash on her head. So it was just horrifying, and we would have to rebuild, and people really lost a lot of lives. So we had this sort of life going on in Sri Lanka while I was growing up. Living in Sweden, I've never seen any bar fights. I've never seen any brawls. I've never seen any gang fights. I've never been in those areas. And doing research, I found that these sort of no-go zones or no-go areas. And I think the media just hypes everything up. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist here. It does exist, but I just wanted to preface where I was coming from, how I grew up. So for someone like me who's moved to Sweden from a country like Sri Lanka where we had a civil war, and I will talk about England in a minute, I don't find Sweden unsafe at all. I let my kids walk to school. I let my kids walk back to my school from their school, it takes about 10 minutes in the dark, in the winter. My son's been doing it since he was 6 years old. My 10-year-old son started when he was 9, going on the bus in the winter when it gets dark here around 2:30 on the bus alone for swimming. So I do allow my kids to do all of those things. I go for walks in the night. I don't feel unsafe or stressed out that they're going to get caught in a scuffle or that they're going to be get caught in sort of gang violence or anything like that. I have absolutely no fear of that. The only fear I would probably have is that the older kids are going on these sort of electric scooters. They go really fast, or if my son misses the bus, but he has a phone. So I think Sweden is really safe for kids, for women. I will leave a link to a lady who does also videos like me, and she lives in Gothenburg, and she talks about the same thing, especially since she comes from the States. So we as foreigners, as a foreigner here, I don't feel unsafe in Sweden one bit. Now, have the crime rate gone up? Yes. Are the statistics correct? Maybe. And I do know that 5 years ago, the crime rate really soared. But in 2026, gun violence has really plummeted. So I really think the Swedes are having a check on it. We've got tighter laws, tighter regulations. So I really want to preface for anybody who's planning to move to Sweden, I would not say no because I was afraid that Sweden was a violent and dangerous country. That is absolutely not the case. For most of us living here in Sweden, we are very, very safe. We feel very lucky to be living in such a safe country, and especially bringing up our children in such a safe country. So now I want to talk a little bit about how I lived in England and what the difference is in crime there in my head and what it is like here. So I wanted to give you a little background and a little story. So when I first came to Sweden, my husband lived in a place called Järfälla with his parents, and we would walk their family dog. Now in Sweden, close to most residential areas, you will find a sort of forest area or a park you can walk in. So they have a forest area quite close, and we took the dog for a stroll, obviously a romantic walk. And this was in winter, it was quite dark. And while we were walking, it was just going on in my head. And I really had to ask my husband to be at the time. I was like, is it really safe to walk in this area with the dog at this time of the night? And he just laughed so much. And I was like, why are you laughing? He's like, no, there are no bears or wolves in these areas. They're further in, like in the north. You don't get them here. And I was like, bears and wolves? What are you talking about? I'm talking about people jumping out behind the trees. And my husband just was in stitches because that kind of thing very rarely happens in Sweden. And he was like thinking I was worried about animals, and here I was worried about somebody jumping us in the middle of the night in the forest while walking the dog and hurting us or trying to take our money or watches or something like that. So you can see the difference from his perspective and my perspective, because I was living in London, and that's the kind of thing you expected in London. You wouldn't walk in the middle of the night in a park or a forest, sort of thing I expected happening in London, or I heard happening in London, or we had on the news in London. And I would never walk in the middle of the night, even with my partner in London in a forest. I mean, it was just unheard of. And then in Sweden, it's a completely different perspective. So we really had a good laugh about it. And I just think that it's so different, the culture here in Sweden and what we perceive as safety here. I want to also talk a little bit about sort of thing that would happen in London that I was worried while living in London that I'm not worried about here. In London, when I was working and living there in my 20s, we were more worried about sort of bar brawls and football brawls, and you could just get caught into sort of a scuffle in a nightclub or even just outside. And this is a typical example. There was a lady and her boyfriend at the time. I think they were young. They were 22 at the time. I think this happened in 2025. They got on the night night bus. And while they were on the bus, there was a young guy by the name, I can't remember his name, I think his first name was Joseph, 22. He had been released from remand that day from jail, and he was sitting on the bus. Now, he had already got a young girl to get off the bus by throwing chips at her, and he started doing the same to this lady and her partner at the time. This could have easily happened to me. My husband was studying to be a police here in Sweden at the time, and he is very unafraid of telling people when they do something wrong. And I was really nervous whenever he came to London, because you were really scared. If you said something to somebody, you could get seriously hurt. The guy that was on the bus, he started throwing chips at this lady as well. So her partner turned around and obviously told him not to do it. He got angry. They ended up in a scuffle. It took all of 33 seconds. I will have a link to her statement in the description box below if you want to have a read through it. And before she knew anything, her partner was stabbed 7 times, once in the heart as well, which was the fatal blow. And he died that night. So that's the sort of crime and sort of thing that I would be really afraid when we went out. We always went out in groups. We were very vigilant when we got on the bus, checked around to see who was sitting there, making sure we sat downstairs, not upstairs alone. This couple went upstairs. So I was really vigilant like that. In England, now having to say I wasn't also afraid in England. I think we're so lucky because the human brain works that way. I mean, we know death is inevitable. We don't spend every day and every minute of every day thinking about it. So I didn't really think about it. It's the same living in Sri Lanka. I didn't think all the time that a bomb would go off or that I would be close to a stabbing or a bar brawl in England. You don't think of it all the time, but it definitely happened a lot more than it does in Sweden. In Sweden, I don't think about that sort of fear at all. I don't have any statistics or any of those things in this video, any points like I normally have. I just wanted to talk about my experiences and where I was coming from and my perspective from having lived in Sri Lanka, having lived in England, and having lived in Sweden for the last 15 years. Now, all of these things are relative. I mean, if you come from a really corrupt and a really violent country and you move to England, it's going to feel less. And if you move to Sweden, it's going to feel even less. Now, has Sweden's crime rate gone up? Yes. Are they doing something about it? Yes. Is it going to take a while? Yes, this is what happens when you have loads of immigrants coming into your country. And Sweden has been very kind, opened its doors like England did in the 80s and the 70s to a lot of foreigners. When they come, it takes years and generations to really integrate into the system. Now, I do know that Denmark and Finland and Norway have had better luck with this. Unfortunately, the Swedes haven't. So I like to think that Sweden, as generous as they are now, are going to tighten their laws like most European countries are doing and start really trying to integrate all of the people who are already here into the Swedish culture and system. I mean, I'm bringing up my children here, and I want Sweden to remain a safe and secure country for them to raise their kids. I am an immigrant. I moved to Sweden, and I find it my responsibility really to make sure that my kids are a productive part of the Swedish society, and that I am a productive part of the Swedish society, that I integrate into the society and to do all the things that they do, not litter, be mindful of everybody's private space. And we will talk about if I find Swedish people unfriendly in the next videos. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and switch that notification bell to hear my perspective. So I think as a foreigner coming into Sweden, it is my responsibility to make sure that I learn the language and that I integrate into the country. I can't come in to a foreign country and expect them to do everything for me. It's like if I invite somebody to my home or somebody comes into my home to sleep in my house, they can't come into my home and not follow my rules or, integrate into my life. It's just the way it is. So I think it's very rude to come into somebody else's country or even their home or their lives and expect them to change everything to suit you. You've made the choice to move to Sweden, so then it is up to you to really try and integrate into the system. And even if it's not a choice and you've been forced to leave your country and come to Sweden, I think it is up to you to try and make the best of a bad situation. And if you find the people unfriendly and the weather cold and all of those things, but you still can't go back to your country because it's unsafe or you feel unwelcome there, then you have to really make an effort when you move to Sweden. I do want to also preface that refugees that come into Sweden, some of them have higher education, some of them don't, some of them integrate easier, and some of them don't. So it really is a mix of people. And with the genuine refugees that come into Sweden, you also get the people in the gangs or crime lords who come in using that as an excuse to come into the country and then set up all of their criminal organizations. Unfortunately, when you open your doors, you can't really always know who you're letting in, and that is just the problem. So I do sympathize with those, especially when I started at SFE. I realized that some people that really had absolutely no formal education, and they were very old as well. Some of them were in their 60s and 70s when they'd moved to Sweden without any formal education. They can't even read and write in their own language. So it has to be really difficult to integrate. But I do stand by my perspective that if you are moving to a foreign country and you are expecting to live there, I think it's important that you do everything in your power to integrate into their culture. Now, I hope this perspective and my perspective has not annoyed or upset anybody. And if it does, please leave me a comment in the description box below. I have absolutely no problems with it. And in conclusion, I want to say, yes, the crime rate has gone up. Yes, they are doing things to reduce it. And no, I do not feel unsafe living in Sweden. I have never felt unsafe living in Sweden, not once in the 15 years that I've lived here and brought up my children. So I hope this video is helpful to those of you thinking about moving and have heard all of these things about Sweden being unsafe. I'm not saying that there's no crime, like I've said in my video now several times, but in comparison to where I'm coming from, what I've experienced in my life, I find Sweden safe. I have no problems in saying on my YouTube channel that you don't need to worry about Sweden being an unsafe country if you're planning to move here. So thank you so much as always for being here. For those of you subscribed newly to my channel, thank you so much. I'm really honored that you're here listening to me. Please give this video a thumbs up, comment, argue, correct me if I'm wrong, all in the description box below. See you next week when I dive into whether I think the Swedes are unfriendly. So with all that said, thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.